All right, let's go over the first day of the group stage of the 6th Invitational 2022. There are 5 days in the group stage in total. Each day has 8 matches, giving us a total of 40 matches, and each day only sees 16 of the 20 teams playing, meaning that 4 teams per day have a bye day. On the first day, it was the 4 teams that qualified through the regional qualifier. So MIBR, TSM, Cyclops, and M&M don't play today. The other 16 teams do. And the first game we're going to talk about is Sonics versus Empire. As you can see from the community predictions on this one, Empire were heavily favored to win their game against the Sonics. Empire has had a good amount of international success, not just this year, but all time. And Sonics, since they've been a roster, have struggled internationally, although have gradually increased in terms of success. Although you do have to take into consideration for this match that Empire was playing with 2 of their players in isolation. Some number of players before the first day tested positive for COVID, and some number of those players before the first day were cleared, but the two members of Empire were not. So Shepard and Always had to play isolated from the rest of the players, whereas Dan, Scyther, and Joystick got to play in the normal play area. So Empire still takes it down 2-1, which maybe it would have been a 2-0 if it were under different circumstances, but still Team Empire managed to pull it out, but just barely. If you look at the maps here, Sonics wins Clubhouse. It was a 3-3 first half, and then Empire takes the first round to bring them up 4-3, but then Sonics wins 4 attacks in a row to win the map 7-4. And then we went to Oregon. It was an 8-7 result in the end, so just one more round for Sonics would have won the whole series for them. They would have won 2-0. They would have got the full 3 points. Do keep in mind that if you win 2-0, you get 3 points, but if you win 2-1, you only get 2 of the points, and your opponents get 1 of those 3 points. It's similar to when they do the best of 1 overtime rules, but now it's applying to the best of 3 series, so you definitely don't want to drop a map. Usually it doesn't matter if you drop a map, but under this system it does. And then on Oregon here, if we take a look at it, it was a little bit swingy as well, and we saw Sonics being very, very close to winning for several rounds. So Empire actually wins the first 2 there on defense, and then Sonics, just like they did on Clubhouse, they win 4 attacks in a row, and they go up to a 4-2 scoreline. And then Empire wins a round, but Sonics win 2 more. They bring it up to a 6-3. Empire wins 3 rounds in a row to take it to overtime. Sonics wins 1 more, and so they're up 7-6 in overtime, but Empire wins the last 2 rounds in overtime to win 8-7. So very, very close for the Sonics. And then we go to Coastline, 7-5. And once again, let's take a look at it. Sonics are in the lead. They go up 4-1. As you can see, they win 2, and then they lose 1, and they win 2 again. They're up 4-1, and then they could have had a 5-1 half. They get clutched on by Scyther here. 4-2 half, still pretty good. But after this point, Sonics only take 1 more round, and Empire ends up winning the map 7-5 and winning the series 2-1. And so let's take a look at the stats. Grixer's stats are quite excellent, very remarkable. 45 and 24. Look at that entry, look at that cost, KPR, all this stuff, great. It's not enough to win his team this series, though, very unfortunate. Pretty middling stats from these players, and Super a little bit lackluster, but you do have to notice the 8 plants here, absolutely massive. And then Always, Joystick, Scyther going a little bit positive, doing all right. Always actually the best performer on his team, despite playing from isolation. And then Shepard and Dan a little bit negative, but nothing too crazy. And we'll move on to the next match. Ninjas in Pyjamas versus Sandbox. This had to be the biggest shock of the first day. Sandbox taking down the reigning world champions. As you can see, 89% of voters thought that Ninjas in Pyjamas were going to take this one down. And it wasn't even especially close. We'll look at the scoreline in just a second. Sandbox, formerly known as Cloud9, and then they were Mantis, and now they're Sandbox. They're on a little bit of an upswing in terms of international success, doing not so well at 6th Invitational. They were the 1 APAC team to make it out of groups, but they lost in the round just after groups. Didn't make it to the Mexico Major, and then they did make it out of groups at the Sweden Major, make it to the quarterfinals, losing to the other APAC team of Damwon Kia. Ninjas in Pyjamas have had their ups and they've had their down. They won the previous 6th Invitational, the 2021 Invitational, and then they made it. They did not make it out of groups in Mexico, but then they made it to the grand final in Sweden, not winning the whole thing, but still placing 2nd. So a big up, and then a big down relative to that, and then a big up. And they've also had their ups and downs regionally, but still, I mean, just about everyone, as you can see, thought Ninjas in Pyjamas was going to take this. Not the case. 7-4 for Sandbox on Cafe, 7-3 for Nip on Clubhouse, and then 7-4 on Bank for Sandbox. So didn't see any overtime, didn't see any max regulation. The most decisive game was Ninjas in Pyjamas win on Clubhouse, but a couple of 7-4s for Sandbox. I think I saw one of the Sandbox players say afterwards that the game wasn't even particularly hard or something like that, which just sounded like a little bit disrespectful, but I think they were just saying they were surprised that the game was as easy as it was, which, you know, maybe is disrespectful. Maybe it's not. Up to you to interpret, I suppose. And then looking at the stats, nothing too crazy. Muzi did pretty good considering his team lost. So Static and Shial, however you say this, they performed pretty well, but nothing super spectacular. And then a little bit of an underperformance from their 3 teammates, but only relative to their performance, really. They did fine. And then a few sort of subpar, but nothing too terrible coming out from Muzi's teammates as well. Let's move on to the next series of the day. So now we have the absolute biggest massacre of the first day and probably of the whole group stage. Of course, there are a bunch more games to be played, but it's going to be pretty hard to top this one. About a little bit shy of 2/3 of voters thought that Oxygen was going to take the series, and man, were they correct. Oxygen hasn't done too much internationally after the 6 Invitational. They did do well at the 6 Invitational, but they didn't make it to Mexico, and then they were last place in their groups at Sweden, but that was with not their full roster and all this stuff, so take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. And then NaVi, last place in their group at Mexico, and that was their only international performance. They were, and also do keep in mind, last place in their group. There were only 3 teams in that group. The 4th team couldn't attend, so they lost to FURIA and Space Station by a pretty wide margin in terms of points. So NaVi hasn't really done anything internationally, whereas Oxygen has, but it was just a little while ago. And right, looking at the scoreline, 7-2, 7-1, absolute destruction, like unbelievable crushing. A lot of people thought Oxygen would go quite far, and a lot of people on Reddit was like, why does everyone have Oxygen really high? And well, I mean, I think they're proving their doubters wrong thus far. They actually have a bye tomorrow, so we'll have to see the rest of their games play out in the other 3 days, but you know, quite spectacular performance. And if we look, NaVi wins this first round, and then Oxygen wins, oh, what, 3? They win 3 in a row, and then NaVi gets 1 more round, and then Oxygen just wins 4 in a row to close out the first map. And then second map, even more decisive. Oxygen wins 6 in a row, and then NaVi takes 1, and then Oxygen just closes out the game. Puts them out of their misery. And looking at the stats, I think Foxay has the highest rating after the end of the first day. 18-5, flawless entry, 100% cost, probably the most impressive stat line here. Oh, maybe the 18-5, I don't know. Everyone heavy negative on NaVi, and everyone on Oxygen. Pot or even or better, I suppose. And then besides Kino, 1.3 and higher, super impressive. NaVi look pretty bad, Oxygen look pretty good. Let's move on to the next match. Next up is Team 1 versus Damwon Kia. This is one of the 2 games that I was most excited for in the first day. It was this one along with the FaZe SSG match, and while the other one didn't really disappoint, this one sort of did. Damwon Kia just sort of dismantled Team 1. I think a lot of people had sort of high hopes for Team 1, but those expectations maybe were brought down a little bit by their performance in Sweden. They are, of course, one of the 3 teams that won a major in the last year, along with FaZe and Ninjas in Pyjamas. All 3 from LATAM, if you're not aware. But people did expect Damwon to win this, and they did win it. And I think fair expectations, Damwon did a decent bit better than Team 1 at the Sweden major. Both of these teams had their breakout performances at Mexico. Team 1 ended up winning the event, and Damwon Kia looked really good in groups, and then just barely lost to Liquid, which sort of looked like the tournament favorites at the time in the quarterfinals, I believe, right? And then Team 1 beat them in the semis, and then went to the grand final, beat Team Empire, right? But then they fell to Rogue in the quarterfinals of the Sweden major, whereas Damwon Kia fell to FaZe in the semifinals by only 1 round. One round. If they had won the final round of that last map, then it would have been them in the finals. And then, considering FaZe the one that won, you know, maybe they would have won. So, Damwon Kia, potential major winners had things gone slightly differently. So, coming in as one of the favorites for the event and the favorite in this match, right? A 7-4 and then a 7-2. I mean, nothing much to say. They took them down. They took them down easy, right? So, Chalet looked kind of close-ish. Team 1 didn't look too terrible, but then they just got blown away on Villa. Damwon Kia looked like one of the best teams at the event, maybe the best team at the event. This has to be, what, the second biggest beatdown? I guess we'll see in the other maps, but not as big of a beatdown as the Auction NaVi game we just saw, but, you know, pretty savage what they did here. Looking at the stats, Alamau did really well, of course. He's sort of the star of the team. Everyone else, Levy did okay, and then everyone else got smashed. And then looking at the side of Damwon, Kia, Yas, who I was actually hyping up quite a lot before the event, was the lowest rated player on the team, the worst performing, didn't really matter, his team still destroyed. Woogieman and Coated really stood out, whereas it's usually Yas and Rin are the big names, but so a couple other players getting to shine, especially Woogieman. Really impressive stats, one of the best for any player on the day. And let's move on to the next game. BDS versus FURIA. So I think this is the most decisive community poll of the day, 92% in favor of BDS. It makes sense, as I think this is the most played international matchup for the year. BDS has played FURIA in 6 maps over the course of the 3 majors, being SI and the Sweden major and the Mexico major. And I think BDS has won 5 of those 6. So they played in the group stage of SI, and then BDS eliminated FURIA from the SI bracket, and then they also eliminated FURIA from the Mexico bracket. Both of those maps were overtime. It was a 2-0 for BDS, but you know, still overtime maps. So FURIA getting quite close, just not being able to take it away from BDS. And it's a 2-0 here. So what's going on, right? BDS was not able to play with their full 5. Rafal is not able to play in the tournament for some reason, which has not been stated by Ubisoft. So I'm not going to speculate on it until we have some sort of confirmation. And I saw it's their coach that's filling in for Rafal. Bios is his name. And I saw him, I believe it was him, on Reddit. Somebody translated something that he had said elsewhere. He was saying, man, this is our tournament to win. If you'd seen us in scrims, I can count on one hand how many games we lost. So apparently they were in incredible form. And I believe it. BDS has always been a quite good team, just falling a little bit short in, I mean, all their international competitions. They usually place pretty well, just not making it all the way through to the end. And right, so FURIA taking him down 2-0. Let's take a look at the map. 8-7 on Oregon, so quite close. You know, another 15-rounder on Oregon, and if BDS could have just taken one more round, they could have taken the map. But then afterwards, FURIA shuts down the series 2-0 by winning 7-1 on Bank. I don't know why Bank was such a destruction and Oregon was so close, but it is what it is. Let's take a look at the stats. Everyone doing kind of poorly on BDS. Well, not even that bad, really, just a little bit below average, except for Renshiro, who did quite poorly. Even much more poor than his coach, for whatever reason, who kept it pretty close to the rest of his teammates, but it is what it is. And then Fantasy, usually the standout performer for FURIA, was their second best player. It was Miracle, who was the real standout in this game, though. 24 and 10, same number of kills as Fantasy, but of course playing the Thermite and the Smoke, 78% cost, and you know, good survival rate. All this stuff, so pretty impressive coming out from Miracle, and good win for FURIA, even if they were playing against a crippled BDS. Let's move on to the next game. Elevate versus Dark Zero, and a 2-0 for Elevate. This is probably the second biggest shocker after the Ninja Pyjamas Sandbox one. I suppose the FURIA one, BDS one, but given the substitute thing, at that point, it's no longer a surprise. But before that, yeah, you would have expected BDS to win. So, right, this is a bit of a shocker. You know, maybe Elevate could have won this, but in maybe 2-1 fashion, but 2-0 fashion, quite surprising. But maybe it shouldn't have been that surprising. Dark Zero as an international team is still largely an unknown quantity, this current roster. They did quite poorly in Sweden, but maybe they were still adjusting. They got, I believe, last place in their group. And, I mean, they're coming in here. They did a little bit better, second place at the NAL finals, but again, that's not international, and they look to still be struggling. So, Cafe 7-4 victory for Elevate, and then 8-7 on Chalet. So, took it all 15 rounds, but still wasn't enough to push it to map 3 or anything. Elevate walks away with all 3 points in the series, and in terms of ratings, NJR popped off. I think he wasn't getting the recognition he deserves. Everyone was talking about Eclipse because he did really well on the second map, but he must have done pretty poor on the first map to just break even in terms of KD. Canadian, really poor showing, unfortunately. Pamazoo kind of bad. I think after this match, Hyper said, all right, tomorrow you're going to see F2 Bazoo, Pamazoo on the F2. And so we'll see what happens with that in the next day. They play against BDS in their next match, so weekend BDS, we'll see what happens there. And right, so besides NJR, Eclipse did okay, everyone else did pretty poorly, and then on Elevate, you know, 2 a little bit lackluster performances, nothing too crazy, and then 3 quite good performances. And I really don't have too much else to say about this. It was just a shocker, and I mean, hope to see Dark Zero in better form come the rest of the group stage. Let's move on to the next one. Team Liquid versus Rogue. Clearly the community thought Liquid was going to win this. I think both these teams had a little bit of a question mark hovering over them coming into this. Rogue coming off of a semifinals appearance in Sweden, which is exactly what they needed or better to qualify for this tournament via points. And Liquid didn't even attend that tournament, even though they looked quite good within their region. And of course, that is the strongest region by far, LATAM, the Latin American region. So Liquid coming in as one of the favorites of the tournament, but I think they still had a little bit of proving to do, and I think this pretty well set them up to be proving it. And then Rogue, was it a fluke? I guess so, or maybe Liquid is just that good. Let's look at the numbers a little bit here. So a 7-4 and a 7-4, not an absolute destruction, but just 2 solid wins by Liquid. And if we look at the stats for the players, Nesk and Palu, just as you expect, absolutely popping off. Everyone on Liquid, at least a 1.0 rating. And then everyone on Rogue got pretty well crushed, except for Aces did quite well. So not too much else to say about this one as well. I think after the first day, Liquid looks like definitely one of the strongest teams, but we'll have to see them against a more formidable opponent coming up. They play against SSG in their next game, and then they also have to play FaZe before the group stage ends. So we'll have to see how they perform against those two teams that I think are a little bit stronger than Rogue, right? So that's all we got here. Oh yeah, also I think Crying had like the worst stats of the day, 3 and 18.4 rating. Oh, pretty abysmal. Sorry, guy. Looks quite bad on paper. Right, next game coming up. And here we have the final game of the day, FaZe Clan versus Space Station. And this was definitely the best game of the day. And I think probably once the group stage is over, this will still have been one of the most exciting games. If you haven't watched this one, I would definitely recommend going back and watching it. I guess you have now been spoiled of the results. I'm sure you probably were aware of the result already, but definitely go watch it regardless. And before I scroll down, maybe if you care to go watch it now before you see who won which map and whatever. Right, 2/3 of the community thought that FaZe was going to win, and I think that's definitely warranted. Maybe Space Station is even a bit overrated. I do think that Space Station will still coming in as the best hope for NA, and we'll have to see what the deal is with that throughout the rest of the group stage. But FaZe, the current reigning major champions, they just took Sweden over Ninjas and Pyjamas, and they looked really good. And I mean, I think probably they were coming in as the tournament favorite, considering they had just won the most recent major. So, right, 7-5, 8-6, 8-7, so quite close. Couple of overtimes and a max regulation. It wasn't looking close at the beginning, though. 5-1 attacking half from FaZe on the first map looked like they were just going to run through SSG. But SSG, they brought it pretty close. They won 4 of their attacks until they eventually fell. 7-5, just 1 round short of pushing overtime. And then we go back to SSG's famous clubhouse. They haven't had the best results on it over the last while, but coming back home, I suppose. Taking FaZe on here, pretty even in terms of attackers and defenders. And if we just look at the round by round, I don't think it's anything too crazy. It ends up, it's a FaZe win, SSG, FaZe, SSG, SSG. So a 3-3 half, and then FaZe, of course, matches that, pushes us into overtime, and then a couple of Space Station wins. So they don't even have to go to round 15 to take this map. And then we go to Villa, and oh man, this was quite a map. So I think that I saw several rounds probably in Cafe and in Clubhouse, and even like the first half of Villa that Space Station maybe shouldn't have won, or sorry, maybe that FaZe shouldn't have won, but they did end up winning. But then in the last half of Villa, and I think it was specifically right after they switched sides, so in the in the second half of regulation, there were 2 back-to-back 3v5s that Space Station won, and then there was also maybe 1 round in like overtime. There were several rounds that all looked like Space Station probably shouldn't have won, so maybe FaZe were eventually cracking under pressure. SSG were really just clutching up whatever it was. It seemed like maybe SSG shouldn't have won this series, but maybe they just really were the better team, and just they got up to a really slow start. I don't know. We'll have to see in their future games if they can keep up this momentum, but beating the current reigning major champions, even if it was super close, is a good way to start out your tournament, especially in the group of death. Looking at the stats here, Bosco really struggled. Sky is a little bit better, and then Rampy and Honcold, okay. Volt's definitely the standout performer. Definitely the player that put his team over the line. That entry score line is just really stand out, and he had a ton of kills, really big KPR. FaZe Clan much more tightly clustered, not enough so to win them the match though. Cameraman and Soul is a little bit negative, but fine performances. And then Astro, definitely the best player on the team in the series, but well, I mean, didn't win the series. They do walk away with 1 of the 3 points, Space Station only getting 2, but I'm sure they're happy with a win against FaZe no matter what the scoreline was. And right, that does it for the games. And maybe I should have mentioned this stuff at the beginning, but I'm recording this after the second day. That's just how things went down. And so I know the results, and I was pretending to not know the results, and well, maybe you couldn't tell. But, you know, coming up soon, I'll have the other games, and probably I'll probably be doing it in the middle of the day tomorrow, so I'll know the results of some of the third day's games, but I just got a little bit behind. Right, so that's going to do it. Those were the first games. Let me know which one you thought was the best. Obviously, it was the FaZe SSG, but let me know who's looking the strongest. I think probably after the first day, yeah, it's looking like OXG, maybe, or Liquid, right? So I guess that's going to do it. With all that being said, I will catch you in the next video.